want to introduce you all to James Supp. He is an Antiques Roadshow expert. We were talking earlier, I found out he has been an expert since, or an Antiques Roadshow expert since 2009. He also owns his company, which is Coronado Trading Company. And I certainly am going to let him tell you a bit more about what he does, why he's an expert for the Roadshow, and have him teach us some things tonight. And then at the end, we will certainly take questions and make sure that that everybody gets all the information they have. So if you guys will help me welcome James Supp. It's so nice to have you here tonight, James.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited about this. First off, I don't mind interruptions, but if you have questions, put them in the chat first, and I'll try to get to them, because I really prefer conversations rather than lectures. It keeps everybody engaged, and it keeps things going a little smoother. And everybody comes from a different aspect of the collectibles world, and you might have a different take on it than I do, or have questions that I didn't even think to ask. So again, I'm always happy to try to answer whatever question you have. Just try to put them in the chat first. Again, my name is James Supp. I work full-time as an antiques appraiser. I've been doing this at full-time since 2007, which in the in the appraising world in general, less than 5% of all appraisers can do this full-time. Most everyone else has a second job or a third or a fourth job. They're a real estate agent that happens to do appraisals as well, or they do estate sales. I have done estate sales, but I got away from that world. Now I just tell people what their stuff is worth. I am in a very strange place in the antiques and collectibles world. I call myself a consulting antiquarian. Basically, what I do is I get calls from auction houses like Heritage, Christie's, Sotheby's, Bertoya, all these major auction houses. When they have complicated appraisal problems, they'll call up me or somebody like me to come in and try to solve them. And what I mean by complicated appraisal problems is things like, well, everyone knows who John F. Kennedy is. He was killed by Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, if you're going to take the handcuffs that Lee Harvey Oswald was wearing when he was shot by Jack Ruby and put those on display or on a touring exhibition, that has to get insured. So somebody has to come up with a value to insure that. So I got called in to appraise the handcuffs Lee Harvey Oswald was wearing. I've done appraisals for the Titanic traveling exhibition, for literally pieces of the Titanic that were shipped around the United States and all over the world to various shows. I had to put a value on that for an insurance company. And my title is, I call myself a consulting antiquarian. Much like Sherlock Holmes is a consulting detective, same kind of thing. Basically, I get paid to talk, which is kind of awesome. And I've been on Roadshow since 2009. I was originally brought on to appraise tools. And then one thing led to another. They got rid of the tool table and moved me to collectibles because they discovered I had a lot of talents outside of the traditional collecting categories. And ever since then, I've been basically just appraising. I've worked on major collections for the Academy of Motion Picture Arts. I've done major museums. Going through a family's house in Bisbee, Arizona. And apparently they said, oh yeah, we had a cousin who was in the U.S. Cavalry around the turn of the century. Yeah, we've got a bunch of his papers in here. Okay. And he had some great C.S. Fly photographs. C.S. Fly was a photographer in Tombstone, Arizona, took a bunch of pictures of Native Americans like Geronimo, things like that. He has some of those pictures in there, and they're a few $1,000s a piece. I'm going through, and he has this cruddy little black book. And inside there, I'm reading through, I just glanced at a couple of pages, and the name Geronimo popped out at me. They'd never opened this book other than to see the front cover to see who it belonged to. And I read a little, I think it was the third page I opened it up to, said Geronimo. And I read it for a few minutes. It turns out this guy was a first lieutenant in the U.S. Cavalry out of Fort Huachuca, Arizona. And he was stationed there when General George Crook was looking for Geronimo. And it actually has a detailed he's the guy who's an engineering lieutenant and Corps of Engineers lieutenant, and it basically has a list of where they camped while trying to track Geronimo. And turns out he was all around where they actually ended up talking to him and convincing him to surrender. But he ended up has notes of him meeting with Lieutenant Gatewood and escorting Geronimo and his family to Tucson to get on the stage to go back east. And this is the only record that they have from a soldier in the field detailing where they were getting their water from, which ranches they were getting resupply from. I think that one sold privately for I think it was $15,000. And literally, this was something that was going to be tossed away. They just didn't care. And I was really lucky that I was the person to find it, because how many other people would have not only opened up that diary, but also been able to put those points together, tried who's been able to go, oh, Gatewood, Geronimo, put those names together. So that's what I mean to get back to pre-gaming, is do a little bit of research on what the person's family was doing. Sorry, my brain is still kind of fuzzy over this. But always try to do a little bit of research, even if it's just asking the people what they have, what they think they know, what the family members were doing. How many of you folks have worked with, I'm going to put this in quotes, artists? I love working with artist estates because they can be of great quality or horrible quality. And I had one fellow in New Mexico whose dad fancied himself a painter. He was horrible, absolutely horrible. His stuff by no means should have been shown anywhere. And this kid was very proud of his dad's art, but he knew that his dad's art was garbage, except that he had been in Taos in the 1950s and 60s and knew a bunch of really big name important artists. He actually had correspondence letters with Frank Lloyd Wright, the architect, and things like that. And I'm like, okay, well, your dad's art isn't worth much. It's never was in a major gallery, had no real records of his sales. And frankly, I'm not an art critic, but I didn't like it. And the kid's like, yeah, nobody in the family did. But we're digging around and they've got letters to and from Frank Lloyd Wright to all these big name artists in Taos, all these important people, all these great signatures, and they were just all tied together in a little pamphlet. And sometimes it's not the I'm trying to think of the way to phrase it. I'm grasping at words here, I apologize. When those values may come in areas that you don't expect. And you also have to look at the value prospects. Is it worth the hassle? Is it worth the trouble to go and dig through everything to try to figure out how important this stuff is? Now, this pack of letters, value-wise, I think it was like $1.5 grand, but it was very interesting for the local museum in, where was it? I think it donated to the Historical Society in Silver City, New Mexico, because it gave interest to them, and they had a few things to tie little Silver City, New Mexico to other important people and other important places. But how do you decide when you're going to work too hard? How do you decide when you need to stop digging? And that is the toughest question to answer. It is so easy to get lost in the woods and lost in the weeds and just keep digging and realize there is no money to be made in what you're doing. It's cool as hell. I love learning this stuff, but man, I just wasted 40 hours of my life learning about this guy who never sold a damn thing in his life. And now I'm the only person other than his kid who cares. And now I own 3 of his paintings. And probably will forever. No, I took it down because it was disgusting. You have to decide how much effort it's going to take and how much money it's going to take. Okay? Because none of us do this for free. We all have to get paid at the end of the day. And I don't care how wonderful and how sweet that family is. Someday, you've got to feed your family. You can't give them too much of your time. So what I try to do is when I'm going through a house, I go, okay, how much do I think the contents in this house are worth? Is it a $50,000 estate? Is it a $100,000 estate? And as you get more experience and go and you see more, you're going to get more accurate in how much you think the estate is worth, and then you figure out how much money can they afford to spend on me? How much is my time worth? And is my time worth $20 an hour? Is it worth 50? Is it worth 500? And I know we've all done it. You found some really troublesome customers where they can't pay you enough just to work for that in their house for that many hours. It happens, and that's okay too. That's a good question. Do you have a checklist of questions to ask when you go in for the preliminary assessment? I have about 1,000 of those checklists, and they never work. I have always tried, other than the practical things, is a washer for sale, is a dryer for sale, those kind of things I always have. But when I'm interviewing the clients and I'm trying to find out the history of the family, I just want to get to know them. That's really the most effective thing, is try to be their friend. Try to get them to like you. Try to get yourself to like them as well. That makes life a lot easier. But it's really important. Just ask, what kind of stuff do you have in this house? I see you got. I see you've got a lot of Lord of the Rings books. Did you guys like Lord of the Rings growing up? Do you have? Try to figure out why they collect, why they have what they have. When it comes to the case of a hoarder or someone who is pathological about their collecting, be aware that those questions might have answers that are going to get very long and uncomfortable. So you have to kind of know where to draw those lines too. But what I try is just figure out what are the family items that may have value or that they think have value. Because often the case, especially when it comes to veterans items or family historical memorabilia, the value in the items isn't where they think it is. Like, my granddaddy was in World War II. Cool, great. What did he bring back? Well, he brought back some guns. And I think that's where all the value is. Yeah, they could be, but they could also be illegal machine guns that they can't legally sell and they have to be destroyed. Happens a lot more often than we care to mention. But they go, well, what else did you bring back from his time in Germany? Well, after the he was there after the war, and he bought a bunch of cameras too. Well, let's take a look at those cameras. Well, because right after the war, you had some amazing cameras coming out of Germany, and with the recent renaissance in photography again, some of those cameras that are $200, $300, even $1,000. So that Leica camera that's been sitting on the shelf for 30 years gathering dust might have more value than almost anything else in the house. So, and I hate to say it, that's something that only comes with experience, is going through hundreds of houses. If you walk into a house and you see a lot of 1960s, 1970s Chinese and Japanese art on the walls, you're like, family was probably in the Navy or the Air Force, stationed in Okinawa or Japan, picked up a bunch of tourist stuff, and now what? You get an idea as you see more and more what type of things people tend to collect. Okay, how to identify what's important? Simple questions. Who were they? What are they known for? And this is where it gets complicated. What do people care about? And what do people value? Going through a house a few months ago, the guy had dozens of sketches from Western artists. Had some what he thought were Charlie Russell sketches. Charlie Russell is the cowboy artist. His paintings are $100,000 paintings. His letters and sketches are $5,000 or $10,000. He had letters from all these cowboy poets. He had all these crazy cowboy collectibles and all these Roy Rogers things. A tremendous amount of Tom Mix, books, novels, dime novels, ephemera, paperwork, all this other stuff. So the valuable stuff was really easy to find. Things that say Charlie Russell on them, great, no problem. We know that they sell well. But when you start to get into the other things, he had an amazing Roy Rogers lunchbox, which still has good value. But he also had a lot of Roy Rogers cap guns and all sorts of other things. And all of his friends were telling him, well, don't sell those cap guns. They're worth a lot. That Tom Mix stuff is great. It's fantastic. Having a Tom Mix dime book or thumb book, the little flip book with what have you. They might have had great value 30 years ago. Nowadays, they have maybe caloric value only. That is, they're only worth burning. Because, yeah, these people who care about them, yeah, they love Roy Rogers, they love Trigger, they love Tom Mix, but they're also cheap, and they're not willing to spend more than a few dollars on these things nowadays. That's something to be aware about, that a lot of times the values change, and right now, in a lot of the collectibles areas, those historic items are just going through the toilet. Cowboy stuff is only just starting to make a little bit of a comeback thanks to the new modern westerns, but for the most part, yeah, the things you can't replace though are those letters, the Charlie Russell letters, the hand-drawn sketches, the anything with a signature on it of any important person is still doing well. If it's a presidential signature, it's probably an auto pen. Auto pen is an automatic writing device that started used in the 1950s, 1960s to sign all the volumes of correspondence. So 90% of the time it's going to be printed signature and auto pen, but once in a while you'll see a real letter from Ronald Reagan thanking them for their donation. That's a couple $100. If you have a GFK one, that's several $1,000s. If you have a William Howard Taft, that's again a few $100 because no one cares about Taft anymore. All they remember is the big fat guy who got stuck in the tub. I mean, it's look at what are people valuing now. Again, I know Charles mentioned when you guys are doing research, look very heavily at when these items have sold, because if you see something selling for $1,000 in 2009, it may not be selling for that amount in 2019 or 2020. What questions do you have? Is Roy Rogers' signature on an item worth much? Well, it depends on the item. If it's a signature on a piece of paper, that's a couple $100 right now. In 20 years, it'll be worth next to nothing because no one really remembers Roy Rogers. If you have Roy Rogers' signature on his lunchbox, that could be good. That could be interesting. But it's not so much necessarily about on a wooden plaque from his museum. Oh, so if I remember correctly, his museum closed for the third and final time recently. And if it's just a wooden plaque in his museum, it depends on what the wooden plaque is. It depends on how it presents. One thing I often say in the modern world of collectibles is how well does it show up and how pretty it is. For example, American flags, 48-star flags. Well, that was 1952 was the last time we made 48-star flags, so they're not making any more of them. Must be worth a lot of money. No, there's almost no money in 48-star flags. Everybody had them. In one of the most patriotic times in American history, they're not worth much. And even worse than that, how do you display a 4-foot by 8-foot American flag? It's too big, it's too obnoxious. You just can't do it. So if it was a smaller flag, it could be worth some money. But I just say, how well do things present? Should you keep something that's out of vogue in the hopes it will come back around again? Ooh, no. If it's in storage and it's put away, it'll never be seen again. I am guilty as everybody. I've got several things that I keep hoping will come back in value. They won't. I mean, and I say that, and I'm wrong occasionally, but I'm a big fan of money in my pocket now rather than waiting for a rainy day. I've got a whole bunch of paperwork related to Roy Chapman Andrews, who was the guy who discovered the first dinosaur eggs in the Gobi Desert in the 1920s. He was also kind of the inspiration for Indiana Jones. I've got a crap ton of paperwork related to him for some of his other things that he was known for, and I keep hoping someday someone's going to start caring about him. Nope, it's probably worth that less now than what I paid for, but it's cool, and maybe I'll donate it someday. But it's never going to come back. I don't think. Um, I'm a big fan of collaboration. If you guys have questions, I try to make myself available, but I'm also very, very busy. Okay, I'm always happy to try. I love the idea of answering questions. How to contact me? You can Google me. My name is James Supp. It's right there. I show up all over Google. The only two James Supps I'm not is I am not the pastor in Hawaii, and I'm not the guy who writes about lubricating fluids in Germany. I'm not those guys.
Now I'm going to jump in on this one because, guys,
Yes,
we have our expert list on the website, on the TKG website, and you can message him through that. And the nice thing about doing it is if you message him through our portal and he responds through our portal, where you two are able to maintain that thread for eternity and always be able to refer back to that. So I would like to encourage you to get used to using the message portal we have to be able to directly reach out to James. And while I've
that's smart.
Thank you. While I've got this, first of all, I failed to mention at the start that James barely made it here tonight because he literally had COVID up till the last couple of days, and so he, in spite of his lack of energy, he certainly has been able to do a great job here tonight, and I appreciate that so much, James. What I'm hearing you say, and it seems like is so important, is that it is the relationship between the potential relationship of items and history that is that elusive thing that can make something valuable when it may not otherwise be valuable because there's a lot of them, but this one is related to something specific to history. And it also sounds like to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that these people, when we're asking about their things and we're looking at their things for them, they might not naturally think about this. They may have had this in the family for so long they've forgotten about it, or it's become just old hat to them. So it does probably take a little bit of nudging, a little bit of inquiring, a little bit of stirring that whole thought process with them that gets them talking about something that we're like, oh, you know what, we do have this this thing back here that was related to our uncle who played baseball back when it was hardly a thing, you know. And so the conversations, us listening, you know, closely and prying gently, but for their benefit, sounds like that is a really good thing for us to incorporate into what he referred to as triaging our clients' opportunities for them. So I really got a lot out of that and appreciate that very much, James.
Well, thank you. And that I think is really the kick of it. And again, what I said early on, we're telling stories, we're sharing stories. That is what provides the most value to any of this stuff. Yes, that can sure be a pretty book, but it's book cover, but what's inside that matters. What are the objects around the house that tell the stories of this family, of this person? And that is the only thing that really makes any of this stuff valuable. Do museums buy collectibles, or do you have to find private buyers, or maybe pay the museum to take it? Great question. I'm going to phrase this answer very carefully. Museums do not buy collectibles. Museums don't buy anything. In reality, they truly do, but they better be something special. Most museums will take donations, and you get an appraiser to come in and give you a tax write-off, give you a document that allows you to take a tax write-off for it. But if you have a particularly valuable item, museums will talk to their donors and try to find someone who will buy that object off you and then donate it to the museum. That normally happens at the 5-figure plus level. If you have to pay a museum to take something, there's something wrong. $30 to $50, right? Nobody cares. If they look good on the wall or what have you. I paid $500 for these, and I thought it was an absolute steal. This was one of the tailors who made suits for Abraham Lincoln. This was his personal set of shears. the person I bought it from, the only reason he found out where it came from was he was at an estate sale. They had all the Civil War era stuff. They're talking, and he was talking to the family, going, "Well, how do you guys have all this stuff?" "Oh, we had this. Like, great grandfather was a tailor, and his clothing was made by. He made clothing for Abraham Lincoln. He bought this for $10 or $15 in the States. So I think it was like in Philly or something like that, or Kentucky. I can't remember." You've got to look, and you've got to be able to look outside the box in crazy ways. It's not only did he know, I mean, what this could be worth, but he had to find an idiot like me who was willing to pay $500 for it. Okay, that's the other kicker, is knowing who to sell this stuff to. And that is honestly one of the biggest challenges in our world, is trying to find the right venue. Because there are people who pay crazy money for crazy things. I mean, my gosh. Have you met Coleman lantern collectors? People who collect, the Coleman lanterns? They're insane. They are looking at every little detail on those lanterns and saying, "Oh, well, this is 1927, not a 1928 model. I want a 1928 because it's only made for 2 years. I'll give you $900 for that one. But if it's 27, I won't give you $30 for it." Yeah, it's a crazy world, and you'll find them. I mean, it is astonishing. Once your eye kind of gets there, it's astonishing what kind of odd values you will find. But it's more, I think, related to trying to find that right sales venue, trying to find that right person. Another good example, velvet paintings. They are so kitschy, nasty, silly. I own 2 because my wife hates them. That's really it. They're in my office, and I think they're wonderful. But for years, you couldn't give those away. Now, a velvet painting of a matador in Southern California, in the right hipster area, that's a $300 or $400 velvet painting. It's all about finding that right market and finding that right person to turn it to. One thing I should be arriving in the mail any day now, I've got for a client, is the Pan American Clipper, which was the first flying boat to fly across the Pacific. For the inaugural flight of that, the tickets were actually engraved sterling silver. They were cigarette cases engraved with the passenger's ticket on it for the men. And the women, it was a compact, of course, because it's 1930s. Those kind of items it has a really cool story behind it. Trying to find a good home for that is what I really enjoy doing. So if you come across things of historical import, movie props, is another thing I deal heavily in. Another thing you can do is, honestly, it's gonna sound weird, but Google me, look at what I've appraised on Roadshow. And that's the kind of stuff I tend to enjoy buying or selling. I also liked acting as a sounding board, and I like being a cheerleader for people. This stuff's awesome. This is one of the coolest jobs on the planet, and I'm kind of glad more people don't realize how amazing it is, because we put us all out of work. But this, and that's unfair. There's plenty of work for all of us. There's so much out there. But yeah, I try to make myself available. Send me an email or reach out to me through the website. I will, do my darndest to answer. If I don't get back to you, don't get offended. Just give me a nudge, because I work a lot.
I'm curious, James, when you mentioned the shears that might be worth $500 now instead of $30.
Yeah.
Do you want to know about things that are interesting based on not the dollar amount, but just how interesting they may be? In other words, we tend to think that the experts we talk to, we need to kind of be targeting a dollar amount. But in your case, you might be saying, well, I would want to know about these shears, even if they're not thousands of dollars.
That's a really good question. In a perfect ideal world, I don't want to get out of bed for less than $500. Be absolutely honest. But here's the kicker. What you may think is only worth $300, I may be able to get $10,000 for. And that's where it gets tough. I mean, here's a metric I would use. Do your prep work on it. In a perfect world, I want to talk to someone who's actually spent a little bit of time researching it and has questions about it. I don't want to be the guy who comes and goes, hey, I've got this, tell me what it is. I want you to come to me and go, this is what I think it is. This is why I think it might be important. Can you tell me, am I on the right track? I love that conversation. Those are much more helpful for me and everybody else, because part of what I enjoy in this world is communicating with people. And I can give you the answers all day long. That's no fun for me. I mean, it should be fun for you. Half the fun in this stuff is just doing the research. Valentina, horrible question. How do you get in the appraisal business? Special training? Question mark. Yeah. It's a tough thing. I love it. I think it's the greatest thing on the planet, because I get to be a momentary custodian for these great artifacts and great objects. I get to play with them. I get to touch them. I get to research them. I get to photograph them, and then I get to give them back. And I don't have to. And I got to play with the Starship Enterprise at the Smithsonian. I got to touch it before it went back into the restoration booth. How cool is that? To get in the appraisal business, honestly, there are a couple of groups. You don't need a certification, although it does help. There's International Society of Appraisers, American Society of Appraisers, American Appraisal Advisor Group. There's a bunch of other ones, but ISA, AAA, and ASA are the three big appraisal groups. And basically, for about $5,000 and about 60 hours of your time doing online webinars, you can get into the appraisal business at the very base level. And they don't teach you a thing on how to do business. They don't teach you a thing about how to actually run the business as an appraiser or to be an entrepreneur. They'll teach you the basics of what you need to know in a pretty good way. They've got great methodology. All three of them do a great job of what steps you need to take in order to accurately appraise something for the IRS. What are the legal ramifications, things like that. But they're not going to teach you how to run a business. They'll just tell you how to be an appraiser. And that can be very, very valuable. Just as an aside, most appraisers don't make a lot of money. Most appraisers make about $100 to $150 an hour when they're billing as an appraiser. I charge significantly more than that. Depending on the job, I'm between $250 and $500 an hour. But I'm not to brag. I'm also really, really, really good at what I do and really fast. So I can afford to charge that. It's not an easy business to get into, but it is a lot of fun. It's also really challenging. I'll be honest, I miss doing estate sales sometimes because it's easier. I mean, it's a lot of physical labor, but the hustle involved in being an appraiser can be tough, but it can be very rewarding as well. Right in the chat, the name of the initials for the appraiser associations.
Thank you.
In no particular order, except that I know a bunch of people in all of them. And the director of education at ISA, the National Society of Appraisers, was a good friend of mine. Or she's still a good friend of mine. She's no longer the director of education, and did a really good job of updating their stuff. But those are the three biggies.
I'm ISA, and I would tell you guys that to maintain your credentials, you have to perform so many and do continuing education. I won't re-up because I'm not doing appraisals. It's way too much paperwork, way too much responsibility to hold documents for so many years and so on. So I think you either have to, I would say this, you can correct me if I'm wrong, James, but I think you either need to really be into the appraisal business or not, because you can't, I don't think you can kind of be an appraiser. It's just such a commitment to a long-term protection of the data and the documentation. So, and I thought I would get a lot out of it, but in my particular case, just the ISA after my name for 3 or 4 years.
I've not been a certified appraiser. I'm getting back into being a certified appraiser just because I'm doing more court cases. but I haven't been a certified appraiser for 10 years because I don't need it. I do take a couple of the classes on occasion, but you don't need it. You don't need to be certified to act as an appraiser. But if you don't know what you're doing, you should take those classes. At the very least, the methodology class for valuation is a damn good class. I mean, at the very least, the USPAP, which is the Universal Standards of Proper Appraisal Practice, is one of the great ethical standards in period. It's got a really good standard for keeping yourself. If you can apply yourself to that standard, it helps to prevent the appearance of bias in your appraisals. And that class, all real estate appraisers need to take. And so that's put in the chat, USPAP. But a lot of people don't need it, and it is a commitment. And it's fun, but it's not for everybody.
I'll maintain USPAP. I agree with you on that. I think that's an easier one to get, and it's one that you can maintain forever, and renewals every couple of years. So that's a nice one, and it gives you some credibility whenever you let people know that you're a USPAP, and that's easier part. It's the easier one, in my opinion.
Yeah, agreed completely on that note.